All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first Facebook Live webinar on young people and sustainable development. I am Sam Loni, and I'm the global coordinator of SDSN Youth, and it is my immense pleasure to introduce Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who is joining us for this live Facebook webinar now. Before I hand over to Professor Sachs, I just wanted to make a few quick remarks. Firstly, that this webinar has been organized by SDSN Youth with support of our lovely colleagues from the SDG Academy. For those of you who are not familiar with our networks, the SDSN was launched by the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in 2012 to mobilize global expertise and solutions around the implementation of the SDGs. And SDSN Youth is the global youth initiative of SDSN, and its mission is to create sustainable solutions for the SDGs. To find out more, you can go to www.sdsnyouth.org. Anyway, we're extremely lucky to have Professor Jeffrey Sachs here with us for the next 40 minutes or so to explore the question of the importance of young people. And of course, this coincides with the anniversary of the Paris Agreement, but how young people can help safeguard the future for the SDGs. And Professor Sachs is the director of the Sustainable Development Center at Columbia University. He's the director of the SDSN. He's also the UN Secretary General's special advisor on the SDGs and a best-selling author with multiple books published in the past decade, including his most recent one, which I have right here. It's a highly recommended read for everyone, Building the New American Economy. Professor, thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, it's great to be with you, Sam, and thanks to everybody for joining. I'm really delighted we have a chance to chat about the Sustainable Development Goals and especially about leadership from young people.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So, Professor, I'll get started with a couple of questions that have either been sent to us, and then we will open the floor to questions from our Facebook Live audience. So, this webinar is coinciding with the anniversary of the Paris Agreement, arguably one of the most important agreements of this century. And to mark the occasion, there was a climate march in Washington, D.C. a couple of days ago with over 200,000 people who participated. It seems that the agreement has created some momentum behind the global climate movement. We're 1 year and a few months from the agreement. How are we doing as a global society? Are we making progress?
Well, this question is really central because basically we know that global warming is a big threat. It's already causing a lot of havoc in many places in the world, especially in the dry parts of the world, because when it gets warmer and it's already dry, that pushes countries towards crop failures, towards famine, and towards instability. So this is a really serious issue. We also know the main solution to it, and that is to move the energy system in each country away from the coal, oil, and gas system to wind and solar power and hydroelectric power, in some cases to nuclear energy, but all to energy systems that don't depend on carbon, that aren't releasing carbon dioxide into the air. And there's a good agreement, Sam, that the world should do this. This is what the Paris Climate Agreement really is about. But there's resistance also. And the resistance usually is coming from the big mining companies and the big oil companies. And this is a political problem. Those companies have earned a lot of money. They're very powerful lobbies. And they say, no, we don't need to do this. No, we should delay this. No, our industry is still the only one that can provide energy. And that's the politics of this. So in my country, in the United States, Donald Trump is surrounded by the lobbyists of the oil and gas industry. He's appointed some really nasty people to office that are basically just paid hacks of the oil industry, like the head of the Environmental Protection Agency, Scott Pruitt, who's a politician of no merit other than the fact that he's been funded by the oil and gas and coal industry for many, many years. So he's a kind of retrograde figure who's trying to hold back the progress to a low carbon economy. So we're in a political struggle. Of course, technology is also a part of the solution, big part. And we need more research. We need every place in the world, young people to study the renewable energy options. Is it wind? Is it solar? Is it hydro? What do you have in your country that can be the low carbon energy solution? But then we need to understand the politics of this. We're in a battle with the old guard interests, the 20th century technologies, and we need a victory of the 21st century technologies. I think we're going to win because the world needs to win on this, but we shouldn't underestimate the power of these powerful lobby groups and how they're still affecting politics in the US, in Australia, in Canada, in Russia, in the countries that have a lot of coal, oil, and gas. There's generally a lot of foot dragging as well.
Thank you for that. And when the Trump administration in politics, so on the weekend, we reached the benchmark of the 100 days of the Trump presidency. Donald Trump marked the occasion by issuing an ad which declared that his first 100 days were a total success. And many were arguing that when it comes to climate policy and sustainable development, it's actually been a failure. He, as you said, he defunded the EPA. He's been threatening to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. He's working with mining interests and fossil fuel interests. As a young person, it's I think one of the first projects that they did was the Keystone Access Pipeline as well. And as a young person, it's quite easy to see this and feel deflated. So what can we as young people do to protect and safeguard the SDGs and the Paris Agreement in light of these circumstances?
Well, put it in the positive way. During his campaign, he said he would pull the United States out of Paris. It hasn't happened yet, and it won't happen, I think, because there would be worldwide opposition to it, including millions of young people. So I think that there is more bark than there is bite, as we say. You know, he speaks a loud, sometimes I think obnoxious voice about climate issues, saying it's a hoax and all of these other things. Of course, it's not a hoax. It's the science that we have. He's just speaking for the oil interest. But I don't think he's going to win this. But don't be disheartened. This is what politics is about. We've been there before. In almost every oil-rich country, you have people like Trump saying, oh, we don't need to do anything, because they're greedy. They want to continue to use their oil resources. You know, the truth is there's very little future for even big companies like ExxonMobil and Chevron and others unless they move decisively into non-carbon energy. And so it's not surprising to me to see what we're seeing, but I don't think we're losing. So far, Trump is making lots of announcements, but I don't think he's getting really very far. Even when he says he wants to defund the Environmental Protection Agency in the budget agreement that was just reached, which admittedly just goes through September of this year, the EPA continues to be funded at a normal level. So it was big noise, but not so much real result. And that's because there's a lot of protests, there's a lot of pressure, and there's the scientific truth. So this is kind of truth versus corporate lobbies. And we're going to have to fight that. The corporate lobbies sometimes win tactical battles, but they can't beat the truth.
Yes, and one question that I had was about this battle that young people have. So one example of this was the divestment movement in the US. So there have been massive campaigns around the world, but in particular in the US and Europe, and where young people were putting pressure on their universities to divest from the fossil fuel sources. Do you think that has been a successful strategy, and is it likely to make long-term impact if we continue with this?
The idea of divestment is to tell the energy industry, look, even if you propose to build a new coal-fired power plant, we're not going to invest in it. We'd lose money. Why should we invest in a 20th century technology when we're in the 21st century? And we know we have to do something different. So I think that this divestment campaign has been very successful by putting the attention, especially in the pension funds and in the insurance funds and in the religious funds and the sovereign wealth funds, that you have a responsibility and a financial fiduciary responsibility. If you invest in the old kind of energy, you're likely not only to contribute to global warming, you're likely to lose money in the future, because these are just bad investments in a world that's going to have to get out of coal, oil, and gas. Building another 40-year coal-fired power plant is a pretty risky, I'd say pretty stupid idea, actually. So this idea is catching on. We have made progress. My own university, Columbia University, said it would divest of coal-based enterprises. The Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, which is the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world with $1 trillion of assets, $1 trillion. That's a pretty good number. They said no more coal investments. So I think the message is getting there. But, when you're campaigning, there's rarely a day when you have a complete victory and you could just say, okay, we're done. This is going to have to be an effort stretched out over many, many years. And if your university, wherever it is has an endowment and it's still investing in coal, oil, and gas companies, I would say that it's a good case to take on this divestment campaign and ensure that your university, or maybe it's the funds of religious organizations, or maybe it's your pension fund, whatever it is, that they're undertaking socially and environmentally responsible investment.
Thank you very much for that answer. And I think that really goes to the heart of issues, that the actions that young people can take, and this political and global momentum that's building, that even it's great to hear that you think that even the likes of Trump can't stand in its way, because this is something that we need to move towards. And
never with Trump. Look, the guy is a septuagenarian. He's 70 years old. He grew up in a different century. He looks backward. Even his slogan, "Make America Great Again," is somehow a backward-looking idea. You guys are the young people for the 21st century. You can't let an old man with old ideas stand in the way. We really need to look forward and to find solutions going forward. And this is a young people's agenda. I'm also saying that Trump shouldn't cut taxes and then leave a huge amount of debt on the backs of young people, or to defund your tuition, because this is really ridiculous. It's old people trying to get even richer and put the burden on the young generation. And that's also true with the climate policy, because who's really going to live in the 21st century climate? It's today's young people, not Mr. Trump. And so basically, you really do have to tell them, and we all together have to tell them, look, you have no right to wreck the future. You're backward looking. You didn't even study these issues when you were young. It's true. He's old enough that when he went to school, I'm sure that climate change wasn't on the agenda, so he doesn't know anything about this really. That's why this really is a young person's challenge.
Professor, you mentioned solutions and that young people are key to developing those. So Einstein once famously said that you cannot solve problems with the same thinking that started them. When it comes to the Paris Agreement and the SDGs, I often hear the word transformative. Many experts, including yourself, have said that we cannot solve these two agreements or achieve them with band-aid solutions. We need new and creative thinking. And as you might know, there are neurological research that shows that children and young people have this incredible capacity for creativity and innovation. So how do you think we can utilize this creative capacity of young people and harness it to create better technologies and solutions for sustainable development?
Well, Sam, I really like the goals because they tell us here's the challenge. So, of course, depending on where you are sitting in the world and what your own local society is, different parts of this 17 goals will be priorities. In some very poor parts of the world, basic issues like access to healthcare, to education, to safe water and sanitation are paramount issues. In some rich countries, it's stop polluting the environment and stop the overconsumption of endangered species, for example. Stop importing goods from environmentally stressed places. If you buy goods that have palm oil in it, or if you're buying coffee or tea or all the commodities we consume, or you're buying fish, you want to know that the products that you're buying have come from sustainable value chains. So the priorities will differ, and I think it's important for each of us to look at these 17 goals, know them, and then say for our own country or our own community, which of these is the big challenge? In New York City, a big challenge is to decarbonize the New York City energy system. Another big challenge in the United States is SDG 10, to narrow the gap between the rich and the poor, to make our country more fair and with lower inequality. So everybody could go online and look at the SDG index that the Sustainable Development Solutions Network made, and look at your country and look at the scorecard. Where does your country rank high? Where does your country rank low? What are the priorities? Or think about your city. Is the water supply safe? Is there a lot of poverty? Is there public transport? Is the air polluted? Is the water polluted? Then once you have the framework of the question and the goal, then there's the pathway problem, is how I would call it. I use the word pathway to say, how are we going to get from here to where we want to go? So it's like climbing a mountain. You can see the mountain peak. You're at the base. It's a little bit dangerous if you climb the wrong path, or maybe even impossible. What is the path to get from here to where we want to go? If you're lucky to be studying at school right now, it's a great paper, a semester paper, or a great thesis or senior essay, or special study, because these are not simple questions, but they are solvable. They're kind of like puzzles, like a jigsaw puzzle. How do you fit in the pieces so that you really create a path to SDG success? And there are also problems where you need group action. Any problem that I'm dealing with in public health or in education or in the carbon. I find that I need good engineers, good development practitioners, some smart politicians, some really high energy students, all working together on the problem if we're really going to be practical in finding real solutions.
So, Professor, you talked about young people and working on pathways to develop solutions. I think one main concern that a lot of young people have is, will they be able to find careers in sustainability? So how is it possible to work on this passion towards sustainable development, but also sustain your life, but also I think make a real difference? Are there careers in sustainability that we can work towards as young people?
Absolutely. You know, I'd say if you're becoming a specialist in coal-fired power plants, you're in the wrong line of activity. If you're becoming a specialist in solar power or wind power or public transport or sustainable cities design or how to use information technology to spread healthcare, some business or NGO or government is going to, or maybe you're going to be self-employed in a startup and become a gazillionaire. You can fund then all the solutions yourself after the after the great success. But startups are going to play a big role in this. I think that this is naturally an area for building a career because it is the future, and people in the oil industry lobbying Trump to pull out of Paris or whatever, they're in the past. So they actually can't get another job necessarily, not one that pays them what they're getting right now. That's why they're fighting so hard to block our agenda. But for young people, this is kind of a gift to say, if you know about the Sustainable Development Goals, first, you're already ahead of your peers in the job market, because I think most young people still don't really know about these goals. So becoming knowledgeable and a specialist in this is highly attractive. When you go to interview for a business, if it's a pretty major business, they've heard of this. And if you've heard of it also, they'll say, oh, good, we have someone who really knows, what our challenge is from a kind of a social point of view. So I think it's a fantastic area to work in. It's so interesting. It's problem solving. You feel good about what you're doing. But I think this is one of those cases where not only you feel good about it, but there's a real marketplace for the skills as well.
Professor, you mentioned the startups and making the businesses and the solutions of the next century. So one particular person that I found very interesting is Elon Musk, who has emerged as quite the celebrity, and I've noticed he's become very popular with young people, particularly in the past few years. So recently he announced the Tesla's solar roof tiles, which will be available for purchase very soon. And not only will these tiles generate power for your household, but they will also be a beautiful addition to your home. So do you think that Elon Musk's thinking of fusing these two things, do you think that could and should inspire a new generation of young entrepreneurs who are not just dedicated to profits and profit margins, but also dedicated to solving the world's issues and making the renewable energy transition?
Yeah, I mean, Elon Musk is really a cool guy. I'm lucky to know him a bit. He's one of those people who is really brilliant, incredibly talented, now quite rich, and able to attract investors. So he's kind of living his dream, that he's able to put ideas into practice. And if you haven't done it, I'd say to anybody, get online and watch a video of one of his SpaceX rockets landing back on the launch pad or on a landing platform in the middle of the ocean. It's unbelievable. This reuse of the rocket boosters, which is his idea for SpaceX. You just never have seen anything like it. The rocket goes up and it comes down just perfectly on target on this platform. And of course, if you've had a chance, and I have, to ride in a Tesla, it's really a high performance vehicle. A little bit pricey in the past, but prices come down with the experience. It's called the learning curve. And that's what Elon Musk is betting on, that by selling a lot of Teslas, he's going to be able to drive down the unit cost to make them the mass market vehicle. So that is a really cool idea. And then he has Hyperloop technology for super rapid transport, say from San Francisco to Los Angeles in California. And as you said, integrated solar solutions, and he's building the world's largest battery factory. And now he announced a couple of weeks ago new investments in neuroscience, so to be able to have a kind of mind over matter, which we now know is very serious technology possibilities. There are already breakthroughs of using the mind, training the mind to control equipment or a prosthetic arm for a paralyzed person that are incredible. It's true sci-fi, but it's real, and it makes absolute scientific sense. And because of the advances of artificial intelligence, we're seeing and neuroscience astounding breakthroughs. So I think Elon Musk is an iconic figure, and he is an inspiration for me too, because I think all this stuff is so cool that we're really going to see it in application. And it's just a good idea you're giving me. I'm going to call Elon and see if he can say a few good words about the SDGs as well, on some occasion soon.
I think that would be wonderful, and that would drive up a lot of interest in the SDGs, surely. Professor, we have had all these questions are basically a little bit of a rephrasing from questions that we've been submitted. One of the questions is basically says that half the world's population is under the age of 30. That's more than 3.5 billion people. So this is the biggest generation of young people the world has ever seen. How can we motivate these young people, particularly where this population boom will be happening, which is in sub-Saharan Africa? And what can we do to inspire action within young people, young Africans, but also get them to really champion the local pathways in moving away from not just aid, but also just long-term sustainable development?
As the SDGs were being prepared, one of the key documents a few years ago was called The World We Want. And I think it's an unusually good title. And the UN doesn't always have good titles. Sometimes they're a little bit sleepy. But that one, I think, really expressed the essence of this. The idea of the Sustainable Development Goals is inspiring. If viewed the right way, it is really saying, okay, we have this huge world population, like you said, 3.75 billion people under the age of 30. We're building a world. So what kind of world do we want? Do we want the world of endless wars, of violence, of environmental destruction, of growing up in a world without rhinoceroses, without orangutans, without great apes, because we've destroyed these iconic species out of stupidity and thoughtlessness? Or do we want a world which is protecting nature and is fair and is moving beyond the wars and the fights between supposedly different races or religions or ethnic groups or linguistic groups? And my view is, of course, the the idea that we should have all of this destruction as somehow inevitable is completely wrong thinking. And the SDGs are very idealistic, but idealistic in the sense that they're really good ideas. You know, this is the world that it should be. And so the problem with the SDGs is, how do we help people to know them and to understand that this is something we need to work on? It's really the attention span issue, I think. And, you know, as young people, I think you have a really unique opportunity. You can essentially say to the media, or use the media, or say to those who manage the media, come on, we're the market, almost 4 billion people. We want this future. If you go to the big, you know, the people that have the biggest follower accounts on Twitter or other social media, I know last time I looked on the list, it's Katy Perry, number one. She had the most followers in the world, almost 100 million followers. If we can get Katy Perry and Justin Bieber and others on the SDG case, and Elon Musk on the SDG case, they will help to propagate the ideas and the news. And I think that that's really key for strategy, because once people understand what this is about, they say, hey, of course, I want to be part of that. I don't want to be part of the problem. I want to be part of the solution. But they may not have heard about it, or they may not appreciate that there's a whole worldwide network that you're helping to lead that is saying, yeah, we can make change. And already hundreds of universities are on this case, and hundreds of mayors are on this case, and dozens of heads of state. And so this is a matter of capturing the public imagination and young people's imagination, and then helping, when you have that moment of recognition, to say, this is really possible. This isn't some crazy idea. This is really possible. And that's, I think, what we're working towards.
Yeah, I think if Justin Bieber gets on the case of the SDGs, we're going to get support from lots of teenagers, I'm sure. Professor, we have some questions from the floor. So, Professor Sachs, what role do you see social enterprise playing in creating solutions, and how can we support the growth of purpose-driven economy and development of young social entrepreneurs?
I think that if you look at some of these goals, like health for all or education for all, they're just crying out for good social enterprises. I work a lot in rural Africa, where the need for access to quality health care is really high. But now I know that you can use moment where creative, information-based social enterprises can say, we're here and we can do some hugely creative things. We can bring education to kids that don't have access right now. We can get them online with the excellent new curriculum. We can solve healthcare problems at low cost. We can install wind and solar energy in remote areas that are off-grid. And that's what social media can do. It's also true, you know, in New York City, we have people disconnected who need help, who maybe don't speak English as a first language and can't navigate their way around the complicated bureaucratic structures that we have. And so this is another area where social media can, as social enterprise, can play a very, very important role. Of course, you need a good business model, a good business plan, some financial backers to get up and going so you can have the time to prove the case. But I think that there's a huge opportunity for social enterprise.
So, Professor, moving away from the social part, there's a question here saying that should the SDGs be integrated into government legislation? So, at the local or national or the federal, is that something that could work?
This is very important. Some countries have already passed laws or taken major executive decision action, like in Sweden, to say, okay, the SDGs are completely mainstream in our government structures. And of course, for certain parts of the SDG agenda, say the energy transformation, that really requires typically legislative changes. So, and for most of the social agenda of the SDGs, universal access to healthcare, universal access to quality education, enabling young people to get a college education. These are all areas where the public budget is really important, and that means public legislative action.
Thank you very much, Professor, for that. Maybe we will ask would you have time for a couple more questions?
Maybe one more.
One more.
Yeah.
One more. Okay. So, Professor, I just wanted to for you to perhaps summarize with this. There is a lot of negative views out there on young people. I saw a recent article in New York Times by an author who I shall not name, who said the world has a problem, too many young people. This rhetoric is very harsh, but it's not uncommon. A lot of young people have experienced being ignored, being sidelined, tokenized. They're not often taken seriously. So when we're dealing with such a rhetoric, how can we inspire confidence in these young people? How can we change, in particular, the narrative and challenge the status quo that young people can make solutions and they've been doing wonderful stuff? And there's lots of opportunities for them, as you mentioned.
Of course, I think young people need to take the lead and take ownership of this agenda. The Sustainable Development Goals are to make a better 21st century. And that's the century of young people. So this is the time to say we're the ones who understand social media. We know how to use the information technology to create global networks like you're doing. We know that there are lots of solutions that are unimaginable to our parents and grandparents' generation, and so it's really important for young people to take responsibility and lead in this area. And also that means in some cases run for mayor if you're in a political system where the opportunity is there. Run for the legislature or the assembly, because we need to get these ideas really into action. This is not just a kind of do-good agenda. Why don't we do a little bit here and there? Like you said, this is a transformative agenda with a pretty tight timeline. If we're going to make the world, I should say, if you're going to make the world safe from a climate disaster, the time is now. Young people have to say, we don't even have the time to deal with the Donald Trumps of the world. We have to be pushing forward very, very fast and very, very hard right now to get the solutions. And I can tell you the same is true on biodiversity. This world will be depleted, really tragically, within a short number of years. Look at the Great Barrier Reef, the greatest coral formation in the world off the coast of Australia. 80% of it killed in the last 3 years, and by the warm ocean waters. So this is not a long-term kind of meandering up the mountainside. This is really now we've got to move. We need plans. We need action. We need social business. We need our cities working in the right direction. And that's the offer of the SDGs. So, I'm here to help you, and you're there to organize young people around the world. And I think together and with everybody online and watching, and I really thank you for that. Go out, get organized, let's get moving, and we can make it happen.
Thank you very much, Professor, for those wonderful and inspiring words, and thank you for always supporting the agenda of young people and inspiring them to take action. And we've had great engagement, and I'm sorry we don't have time for a question, but one was, why don't you run for president, Professor Sachs? Is that something you have in mind?
Let's run for SDG success. That's what we're running for, and let's continue to have these webinars, because I think they're a great opportunity, and we'll continue to have the discussion throughout the year.
Thank you very much, Professor. And I'll finish with one quote, which is a mentor of mine said that I don't like the phrase that young people are part of the future. And I said, why? And he said, because it implies that they're not part of the present, and they're absolutely part of the present. Thank you so much for your time, Professor. Have a great day.
Everybody have a great time. Thank you.
Yeah, everyone. Thank you for joining. Bye-bye.
Peace.